Don't stop. Just keep driving, someone muttered as the storm swallowed the road whole. But Ethan Cole had already hit the brakes. Rain hammered the windshield in relentless sheets, the wipers fighting a losing battle as visibility dropped to barely 10 feet ahead. Thunder rolling low across the Texas sky like a warning no one wanted to hear. And there, just past the flicker of his headlights, a figure lay crumpled near the shoulder, half shadow, half motion, as if the storm itself had tried to erase her. "Dad, is that a person?" His daughter Lily whispered from the back seat, her small voice cutting through the noise, and Ethan didn't answer right away, his hands tightening on the wheel, jaw set, eyes locked forward, because he had already made the decision long before the question was asked. "Stay here," he said quietly, already reaching for the door, the wind ripping it open the moment the latch gave, cold rain slamming into him like a wall, soaking his shirt in seconds as he stepped out onto the slick asphalt, each footfall steady, deliberate, the kind of movement that didn't come from panic but from memory, from something trained, something buried. "Sir, it's not safe out there," a passing driver shouted through a cracked window before speeding off into the storm. "You should call someone." Another voice echoed from the dark, but Ethan didn't look back, didn't argue, didn't explain, because some men don't wait for permission to do the right thing. They just move. And when he reached her, he dropped to one knee without hesitation, rain pooling around them, his hands already working, checking her, breathing, steady but faint, fingers pressing lightly at her wrist, counting, measuring, calm in a way that didn't match the chaos around him. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said, voice low, controlled, but her eyes stayed closed, her face pale beneath strands of rain-soaked hair, one arm curled protectively against her side, and for a moment, just a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the sound of her breath and the rhythm of the storm. Ethan exhaled slowly, shrugging off his jacket and placing it over her shoulders, shielding what little he could from the cold, then adjusting her position with careful precision, movements efficient, practiced, almost too precise for a man who spent his days fixing engines and scraping by paycheck to paycheck. Lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating them in a flash of stark white, and in that instant, something caught his eye, clipped to the inside of her jacket, half hidden, a small piece of metal, engraved, official, not something you'd expect to find on a woman alone on a back road in the middle of nowhere. Ethan's gaze lingered for half a second longer than necessary. Then he looked away, saying nothing, because whatever that badge meant, whatever story it carried, it didn't change what mattered right now. "We're getting you out of here," he murmured, more promise than statement, lifting her carefully, supporting her weight with a strength that felt effortless, as if he'd done this before, as if he'd carried more than just bodies through worse than just storms. Behind him, Lily watched through the fogged-up window, eyes wide, small hands pressed against the glass, and somewhere between the thunder and the silence of the empty road, something shifted, something unseen, like the first breath before a storm changes direction, because the man everyone else had just passed by had just stepped into a story that was never ordinary to begin with. The truck door slammed shut against the wind as Ethan eased her into the passenger seat, his movements steady, controlled, the kind of calm that did not come from luck but from discipline, rainwater dripping from his sleeves onto the worn fabric as he reached across to secure the seatbelt with careful precision. "Hang on," he said quietly, though he did not know if she could hear him. Then he circled back to the driver's side, boots splashing through shallow puddles forming along the cracked asphalt, the storm still roaring around them like it had something left to prove. Inside the cab the air was warmer, quieter, the heater humming low as he turned the dial, one hand on the wheel, the other adjusting the vents toward her. "Is she okay?" Lily asked again, her voice softer now, uncertain. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror, eyes steady, reassuring without needing to say too much. "She is breathing," he replied, simple, factual. "That means we still have time." Lily nodded slowly, holding onto those words like they mattered more than anything else in that moment. The truck pulled back onto the road, headlights cutting through the rain in narrow beams, tires gripping the wet pavement as Ethan drove with measured control, not too fast, not too slow, every decision deliberate, every movement calculated, Like a man who had learned long ago that rushing could cost more than waiting. The woman shifted slightly beside him, a faint breath catching in her chest, and Ethan glanced over, his focus sharpening. "Stay with me," he said under his breath, adjusting her position just enough to keep her airway clear. His fingers checking her pulse again, without hesitation, consistent, methodical, practiced. Lily watched him, her small brow furrowed. "How do you know what to do?" she asked, and for a second, just a second, Ethan did not answer, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the inside of the cabin. Brief, stark clarity. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost distant. "Some things you do not forget." The words hung there, quiet, heavy, before fading back into the steady rhythm of the engine and the storm, a few miles ahead. The glow of hospital lights began to break through the darkness, faint at first, then clearer, a destination in the middle of chaos. But as they pulled into the emergency entrance, the world did not slow down the way Lily expected it to. It did not welcome them with relief or gratitude. Instead, it met them with suspicion, a nurse rushing out under the awning, her expression tight, assessing. "Sir, what happened here?" she called out, already signaling for a gurney. Ethan stepped out, rain still, falling around him as he moved to open the passenger door. "Found her on the road," he said simply, no embellishment, no attempt to justify, just the truth. The nurse's eyes flicked over him quickly, taking in the soaked clothes, the worn truck, the absence of anything that looked official, her tone shifting just slightly, cautious now. "Did you call this in?" she asked, and Ethan shook his head once. There was no time. The gurney was rolled forward, staff moving efficiently, lifting the woman with practiced care, and for a moment, as they transferred her inside, the edge of her jacket shifted again, revealing that same metal insignia, catching the light under the hospital awning, a symbol that did not belong to an ordinary life. Ethan noticed, just like before, and just like before, he said nothing, but inside, something old and familiar stirred. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition, the kind that does not need confirmation, because some truths do not need to be spoken to be understood. The automatic doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss as the hospital swallowed the storm behind them, bright fluorescent lights replacing the chaos of wind and rain. But the tension did not fade. It shifted, settled into something quieter, sharper. Ethan followed just a few steps behind as the medical team moved the woman down the corridor, their voices quick, professional, layered with urgency that did not need to be loud to be felt. "We need vitals now," one nurse said. "Possible exposure, mild hypothermia," another added, and Ethan stopped at the threshold where the hallway split, his presence no longer required, no longer welcomed. "Sir, you cannot come any further." A voice cut in, firm but controlled. Ethan nodded once. No argument, no resistance. He had done what he came to do, and that was enough. But not everyone saw it that way. A security guard approached from the side, posture rigid, eyes scanning Ethan from head to toe, taking in the soaked clothes, the worn boots, the quiet demeanor that did not explain itself. "We are going to need you to step over here," the guard said, not aggressive, but not trusting either. Ethan turned slowly, meeting his gaze without tension. "I brought her in," he replied simply. "That is all." The guard hesitated, just for a moment, as if expecting more, an excuse, a story, something louder, but Ethan offered nothing else, and somehow that made the silence heavier. Behind them, Lily stood near the wall, clutching the edge of her father's jacket that still hung loosely around her shoulders, her eyes moving between the guard and her father, sensing the shift even if she did not understand it fully. "Dad?" she whispered, and Ethan glanced back, his expression softening just enough to reassure her. "It is all right," he said quietly, then looked forward again, calm returning like it had never left. A nurse walked past quickly, then paused, glancing back toward Ethan, something about him catching her attention, not his appearance, not his words, but the way he carried himself, composed, steady, like someone who had stood in harder places than this. "You said you found her?" she asked, stepping closer. Ethan nodded. "On the side of the road, about 12 miles out." The nurse studied him for a second longer, then gave a small nod, professional respect flickering beneath her caution. "You did the right thing." she said, before turning back toward the treatment rooms. And for a moment, just a moment, the tension eased, but then it returned in a different form, quieter, more subtle. From down the hall came the faint sound of a phone ringing. Not loud, not chaotic, but distinct, sharp, purposeful, the kind of tone that did not belong to ordinary calls. A passing staff member answered it, her expression shifting almost instantly, posture straightening, voice lowering. Yes, she is here. A pause. Then, understood. She hung up slowly, eyes scanning the hallway as if seeing it differently now. And Ethan noticed, not because he was looking for it, but because he recognized the change, the invisible line between normal and something else, something structured, controlled. And without warning, the atmosphere began to tighten, not with fear, but with expectation, as if the building itself was preparing for something to arrive. Ethan exhaled quietly, his gaze drifting once toward the closed doors where the woman had been taken, then back to Lily, who was now watching him with quiet trust. And he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her, steady as ever, even as the world around them began to shift in ways no one had yet explained. The hallway did not get louder. It got quieter, the kind of quiet that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Nurses moved with more intention, footsteps softened against the polished floor, and somewhere behind the closed double doors a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. But out here the air felt different, like something unseen had just entered the room, and no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Sir, I am going to need your name, the security guard said again, this time more formal, clipboard now in hand. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not defensive, not impatient, just present. Ethan Cole, he answered, voice calm. Even, the guard wrote it down, glancing up briefly as if the name should mean something more than it did. And your relation to the patient? Ethan paused for half a second, just long enough to be honest. None, he said, and that word lingered longer than expected, because it sounded simple, but it did not feel simple, not after everything that had just happened. The guard nodded slowly, though his eyes remained uncertain. You found her 12 miles out? Yes, Ethan replied. On Route 47, near the old mile marker. The guard scribbled again, the pen pressing harder than necessary against the paper. You touched her? He asked, and Lily shifted slightly behind Ethan. Sensing the tone change, Ethan did not react, did not take offense. I helped her breathe, he said quietly, not a defense, not an explanation, just a fact. The guard hesitated, something in Ethan's tone making it difficult to push further, but the tension did not break. It stretched, thin and tight, just as a doctor stepped out from the treatment area, removing her gloves, her eyes scanning the hallway before landing briefly on Ethan, then on the guard. We have her stabilized, she said, professional, composed. She is going to be fine. A small breath seemed to release from the space around them. Not relief exactly, but a shift, the kind that comes when uncertainty loses its edge. Lily let out a quiet sigh, her fingers loosening slightly from her grip on her father's jacket. Can we see her? She asked softly, and Ethan glanced down at her, then back at the doctor, who shook her head gently. Not yet, she replied, then added, after a brief pause. We are still running some checks. Her tone was careful now, measured in a way that suggested there was more she was not saying, and Ethan noticed, not because she said it, but because of how she held herself, shoulders slightly squared, eyes more alert than before, the kind of posture that belonged to someone who had just been given new information. Then from down the hall, another figure appeared, not rushing, not loud, but purposeful, a man in a dark jacket, his steps controlled, his gaze scanning the environment with quiet authority. He spoke briefly with the nurse who had taken the call earlier, their conversation low, quick, and when she nodded, it was not casual, it was deliberate, as if confirming something that had already been decided elsewhere. The man turned his head slightly, his eyes passing over the hallway, over the guard, over the doctor, and then they stopped on Ethan, just for a second longer than necessary. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not recognition exactly, but awareness, the kind that does not need introductions, the kind that lingers even after the moment is gone. Ethan did not look away, did not react. He simply stood there, steady as ever, one hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder, as the quiet tension in the room deepened, not with fear, but with the sense that whatever came next was already on its way. The man in the dark jacket did not raise his voice, did not make a scene, but the effect of his presence spread quietly through the hallway. Like a ripple no one could quite explain, conversations softened, movements became more precise, and even the security guard straightened slightly without realizing why. "Sir," the man said calmly, addressing the guard first, his tone respectful but firm. "I will take it from here." The guard hesitated, glancing between him and Ethan, uncertainty flickering across his face. "And you are?" he asked, trying to hold his ground. The man reached into his jacket and produced a small identification card, not waved, not emphasized, just shown briefly, enough for the guard's expression to change instantly, shoulders easing, posture shifting from control to compliance. "Understood," the guard replied, stepping back without another word. And just like that, the invisible line in the room moved, now centered somewhere else entirely. The man turned, his attention to Ethan, his gaze steady, assessing but not hostile. "You brought her in," he said, not a question. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." The man studied him for a moment longer, as if measuring something that could not be seen on the surface. Then he gave a slight nod. "That was the right call," he said, simple, direct, and for a second, the weight in the air shifted again. Lily looked up at her father, sensing the difference. The absence of suspicion, replaced by something closer to respect, even if it was not spoken aloud. From down the corridor, the same nurse from earlier approached quickly, holding a small sealed bag. "This was on her," she said, handing it carefully to the man in the jacket, her tone lower than before, more controlled. He accepted it without hesitation, opening it just enough to glance inside. And for the briefest moment, his expression changed, not dramatically, not enough for most to notice, but enough for Ethan, who had been watching without appearing to watch. Inside the bag, barely visible, was that same insignia, now fully revealed under the bright hospital lights, clean, unmistakable, official in a way that did not belong to ordinary life. The man closed the bag immediately, his movements precise, practiced. "Has anyone else seen this?" he asked quietly. The nurse shook her head. "Just me," she replied. "And him," she added, nodding slightly toward Ethan. The hallway seemed to pause around that detail, not physically, but in feeling, like a breath held too long. The man's gaze returned to Ethan, sharper now, not suspicious, but focused. "You recognized it," he said. Again, not a question. Ethan met his eyes, calm, unflinching. "I have seen something like it before," he replied, careful, measured, neither confirming nor denying more than necessary. The man held that silence for a moment, then gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, as if that answer was enough, or perhaps exactly what he expected. "She is going to ask about you," he said quietly, slipping the bag back into his jacket. "When she wakes up." Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze drifting briefly toward the closed doors where she lay, then back to the man. "She does not need to," he said simply, and there was no pride in it, no attempt to be modest, just truth, the kind that stands on its own. Lily tightened her grip on his sleeve slightly, sensing something important had just passed between them, even if she could not understand it fully, and for a moment, the hallway returned to stillness. But it was not the same stillness as before. This one carried weight, recognition, and the quiet understanding that whatever had begun on that storm-covered road had now crossed into something far bigger than anyone there had first believed. The man in the dark jacket did not move away, but everything around him began to move differently, quieter, sharper, as if the hallway itself had been given new instructions. A nurse adjusted her pace without being told. A doctor lowered his voice mid-sentence. And somewhere beyond the glass doors at the far end of the corridor, faint at first, then unmistakable, came the distant thrum of rotors cutting through the storm outside. Lily looked up, eyes widening slightly. "Dad, what is that?" she whispered, and Ethan did not answer right away, his gaze shifting subtly toward the sound, listening not just with his ears but with something deeper, something that recognized patterns long before they became obvious. The man in the jacket spoke into a small device near his collar, his voice low, controlled. "Confirm arrival point." "Yes, she is inside." A pause. Then, proceed. And just like that, the tension that had been building quietly now found direction. The automatic doors at the end of the hall slid open again, not with urgency, but with purpose, and a group entered, not loud, not chaotic, but precise. Each step measured, each movement coordinated without needing explanation. They were not dressed to stand out, but they did anyway. Posture straight, eyes alert, presence undeniable, and as they moved forward, the space seemed to part for them naturally. Conversation stopping mid-sentence, staff stepping aside without being asked, respect forming not from fear, but from recognition. Clear the immediate area. One of them said calmly, not raised, not aggressive, but final, and the hallway obeyed. The guard stepped back further. The nurse moved aside. Even the doctor who had spoken earlier paused, watching with a new understanding settling behind her eyes. Lily instinctively stepped closer to Ethan, her small hand finding his again, and Ethan remained still, grounded, his expression unchanged, but his awareness sharper now, following every detail, every shift, because this was no longer just a hospital moment. This was something else entirely. The man in the jacket turned slightly toward Ethan once more, his voice lower now, almost private despite the movement around them. They do not mobilize like this for just anyone, he said, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. Ethan's gaze remained steady. I figured, he replied quietly, then added nothing more, because some things did not need to be said twice. The group continued down the hall toward the closed treatment room, their presence controlled, disciplined, and when they reached the door, one of them paused, hand resting briefly against the frame as if marking the moment, then pushed it open, disappearing inside without hesitation, and just like that, the hallway fell into a deeper silence, not empty, but waiting, the kind of silence that comes before something important is revealed. Lily looked up again, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is she? And this time Ethan did not answer at all. Not because he did not have an answer, but because he understood. Something that others were only beginning to feel, that whatever name she carried, whatever rank she held, it was about to change everything in this room, and maybe more than just this room, because outside, beyond the walls, beyond the storm, the sound of the rotors did not fade. It hovered, steady, patient, as if the world itself had stopped just long enough to wait for what would happen next. The door to the treatment room closed with a soft click, and for a moment, nothing moved. The hallway holding its breath as if even the air understood that something important was unfolding just beyond that barrier. Lily leaned closer to Ethan, her voice barely audible. Why are they all acting like that? She asked, and Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the door, calm, steady, but deeper now. Because they know who she is, he replied quietly, not guessing, not wondering, but certain. Seconds passed, then a minute, and then the door opened again, not abruptly, but with intention. One of the uniformed men stepped out first, his posture firm, his expression composed. He looked down the hallway once, then spoke clearly, not loud, but with a weight that carried through the silence. We need immediate clearance of this corridor, he said, and the effect was instant. Staff moved without hesitation, conversation stopped, footsteps redirected, and within moments the space shifted from public to controlled. The doctor who had been there earlier stepped forward slightly, her voice respectful now, measured in a way that had not been there before. Is she stable? She asked. The man gave a single nod. She is regaining consciousness, he answered, then added after a brief pause. And she is asking questions. That detail seemed to settle over the room like a final confirmation. The nurse from earlier exchanged a quick glance with the man in the dark jacket, who now stood just a few feet away from Ethan, his attention sharper than before. What kind of questions? The nurse asked, and the man in uniform met her gaze. Specific ones, he said, then shifted slightly, his eyes moving past her, landing directly on Ethan. About the man who brought her in. The silence that followed was not accidental, it was deliberate, as if every person in that hallway had just been pulled into the same moment. Lily tightened her grip on Ethan's hand, looking up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, and Ethan exhaled slowly, not surprised, not uneasy, just aware that the moment he had tried to leave behind had now returned to stand in front of him. Sir. The man continued, stepping closer, his tone still respectful, but now direct. She would like to speak with you. Ethan did not answer immediately, his gaze flickering briefly toward Lily, then back to the man. Is that necessary? He asked, not resisting, not avoiding, just asking the question. Plainly, the man held his eyes for a second longer, then gave a slight nod. Yes, he said simply. No explanation, no elaboration, just certainty. And something in that answer carried more than authority. It carried truth, the kind that did not need to be justified. Ethan looked down at Lily, his expression softening just enough to reassure her. Stay right here, he said gently, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. She nodded, though her eyes followed him closely. Then Ethan turned back, his steps quiet, measured, as he moved toward the open door. The room beyond was brighter, calmer, machines humming softly. And at the center of it all, she lay awake now, eyes open, focused, not confused, not afraid, but aware in a way that changed everything. Her gaze found him the moment he entered, and in that instant, without a single word spoken, the truth between them became clear, not through rank, not through title, but through recognition, the kind that only exists between people who understand what it means to carry more than they show. And as the door closed gently behind him, the hallway outside remained in silence, waiting, because whatever was about to be said inside that room would not just answer questions, it would redefine everything that had come before. The room felt smaller once the door closed, not because of the walls, but because of the weight of the moment settling between them. Machines hummed softly, steady and controlled, a quiet contrast to the storm still raging somewhere beyond the glass. Ethan stopped a few feet from the bed, not too close, not distant either, just enough space to respect what she was and what she had been through. Her eyes never left him, sharp, aware, not clouded by confusion the way most would be after something like this. You moved me before the cold could take hold, she said, her voice low, measured, each word chosen carefully. Ethan gave a slight nod. You needed help, he replied simply, no embellishment, no attempt to claim more than that. She studied him for a moment longer, her gaze searching not his face, but something deeper, something beneath the surface. Most people kept driving, she said, not accusing, not bitter, just stating what she already knew. Ethan did not react. Most people are not trained to stop, he answered quietly, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes when a piece of the puzzle finally fits. No, she said softly, almost to herself, they are not. A brief silence followed, not empty, but full, the kind that carries meaning without needing to be filled. She adjusted slightly against the pillow, the movement controlled despite the strain it must have taken, her hand resting lightly near her side. You checked my airway, stabilized. My position, kept me warm, she continued, her tone steady, analytical. You did not hesitate. Ethan remained still, his posture unchanged. You do what needs to be done, he said. And again, there was no pride in it, just truth. She held his gaze for another second, then exhaled slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected. You have done this before, she said, this time not as a question, but as a quiet acknowledgement. Ethan did not answer directly, his eyes drifting briefly to the window where faint flashes of lightning still illuminated the night, then back to her. A long time ago, he replied, and that was all, but it was enough, because she understood what he did not say, the years behind it, the weight carried without recognition, the choice to walk away from something that defined most people who ever touched it. She nodded slightly, accepting that answer without pressing further, because she knew better than to ask a man like him for more than he was willing to give. What is your name? She asked after a moment, her voice softer now, less guarded. Ethan hesitated for half a second, not out of fear, but out of habit, then answered, Ethan Cole. She repeated it quietly, as if committing it to memory, not for protocol, not for a report, but for something more personal. Ethan, she said again, then met his eyes fully, and this time there was no distance left between them, only clarity. You saved my life, she said, and the room seemed to still around that sentence. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Ethan shook his head slightly, almost instinctively. I did what anyone should have done, he replied, and for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her expression, not because she believed him, but because she understood exactly why he would say that. Outside the door, the hallway remained silent, waiting, but inside, something had already shifted, not power, not status, but respect, the kind that cannot be ordered, cannot be forced, only recognized when it stands quietly in front of you. When Ethan stepped back from the bed, the space between them returned, but something had already been carried across it, something that did not need words to remain. She watched him carefully, not with authority, not with command, but with something quieter, something earned. You are leaving, she said, not surprised, just certain. Ethan gave a small nod, his expression steady. My daughter is waiting, he replied, simple, grounded, as if that alone explained everything, and in a way, it did. She followed his gaze briefly toward the door, as if she could see beyond it, then back to him. People like you do not stay where they are praised, she said softly, and this time Ethan did not respond at all, because he knew she was not asking. She shifted slightly, reaching toward the side table where the sealed bag now rested, one of the uniformed men stepping forward instinctively, but stopping when she raised her hand just enough to signal control without effort. She retrieved the insignia slowly, holding it in her palm for a brief second before looking back at Ethan. This is what they see, she said, her voice calm, measured. Rank, command, structure. Then she closed her fingers around it gently. But that is not what saved me. Her eyes met his again, clear, unwavering. You did. The room seemed to quiet even further around those words, not because they were loud, but because they carried weight that did not need volume. Ethan shook his head slightly, almost instinctively. You would have made it, he said, and there was no arrogance in it, no false modesty, just the way he chose to carry things. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once, accepting the answer not because she agreed, but because she respected the way he held it. Then at least allow me to say this, she continued, her voice soft but firm. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you do not hesitate. Ethan's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes softened, not for himself, but for the sincerity in her words. I will not need anything, he replied quietly, then added after a brief pause, but thank you. And that was enough, because between them, gratitude did not need to be repeated, it needed to be understood. He turned then, his steps the same as always, quiet, measured, without urgency, and as he reached the door, she spoke once more, not loudly, but clearly enough to follow him. Ethan, he paused, just for a second, without turning fully. The world still needs men who choose to stop, she said, and this time, there was something in her voice that was not command, not rank, but respect, the kind that cannot be given lightly. Ethan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without making it larger than it needed to be. Then he stepped out into the hallway, where everything had already changed. The corridor that once questioned him now stood still. The group that had arrived with quiet authority now aligned along the walls, and as he walked forward, hand reaching gently for Lily's, something happened that no one had announced, no one had ordered. One by one, in complete silence, they straightened, shoulders back, eyes forward, and then, without a single word spoken, they raised their hands in a precise, unified salute, not loud, not dramatic, just still, absolute, the kind of respect that does not need to be seen to be felt. Lily looked up in quiet amazement, her small hand tightening in his, but Ethan did not stop, did not turn. He simply walked forward, guiding her gently toward the exit, past the silence, past the recognition, and back into the night where the storm had already begun to fade. Because some men do not stay to be honored, they leave quietly, carrying their dignity with them. And in that silence behind him, the truth remained, that respect given without demand is the only kind that truly lasts.